Dream to me is a slightly different in this case. There's not a single school. There's not even a single category of schools. It doesn't mean it's like the Ivy League or the SEC. I want to go to a Big Ten school. That's my dream. It's more about your fit.
Welcome to Startup Dad, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of dads who are also leaders in the world of startups and business. I'm your host, Adam Fishman. In today's episode, I'm joined by writer, best-selling author, and college admissions expert Jeff Selingo. He has written about colleges and universities for more than 2.5 decades and is a New York Times best-selling author of 3 books. His 4th book, just released this week, is called Dream School: Finding the College That's Right for You. And it's based on over 2 years of research and surveying across 3,500 parents. In addition to being a regular contributor to The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal, he's also an advisor to the president at Arizona State University, writes a bi-weekly newsletter called Next, and co-hosts the Future You podcast. He's a husband and the father of 2 almost college-bound kids. Today, we talked about the Gordian knot of modern-day college admissions and decision-making process he has covered in his 4 books: the Moneyball approach to college selection for families, the surprising aspects of his research for Dream School, and how families can identify their own dream schools, and why brand-name colleges aren't the end-all be-all for students. We ended with a robust discussion on the future outlook for college admissions, the role of AI in higher education, and what has to change with the high cost of college degrees. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Startup Dad on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Welcome, Jeff Selingo, to Startup Dad. Jeff, it is my absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about the Gordian knot that is the modern-day college admissions and decision-making process. You are an expert on this. You've written 3 books on the topic and just published your 4th book, which is called Dream School: Finding the College That's Right for You. And I wanted to jump in and just ask you about some of your inspiration for this book. What led you to write Dream School after the previous 3 books that you've published?
So I have worked in and around higher ed for more than 25 years, and we seem to think that there's only 30 or 40 colleges out there. And when I wrote my last book, Who Gets In and Why, so many people would come up to me after events, or they would write to me and they would say, but what if we don't want to go to, one of these big public universities or these Ivy League institutions or the places that we hear about all the time? What are we looking for in a good college? How can we tell, these schools of hundreds and thousands of them, a couple thousand in the US overall, how can we tell if they're a good college? And that's really what I wanted to do with Dream School. There are two big opportunities I felt like I had with this book. One was to kind of widen that perspective that we had on colleges so that we stopped just talking about the same 25 schools all the time. The second piece then was, once we did that, once we shifted that mindset, once we expanded that aperture on college, it was then to tell people or explain to people or bring people along in this journey, bring readers along in this journey. What are we looking for in a good college? And that's really the second half of the book, really focuses on those aspects of what makes for a good school.
Awesome. And your last book, Who Gets In and Why, was really told more from the college perspective itself, like how do they select? And this one is much more about how do you, as the parent, as the family, figure out which one's right for you. I think for my audience, that is a much more pertinent question than how the colleges select. Before we go too deep on Dream School and college admissions, I wanted to start actually with one interesting aspect of your background that I find most fascinating. And that is, for you, and I read this about you in your bio, despite having college and higher education as the thing you've been focused on for decades, your work, your writing, your advising, consulting work, you didn't have that focus growing up. So how did you develop a passion for this area?
So you're right. My mother didn't go to college. She worked as a teacher's assistant without a college degree. She graduated from high school. My father was a high school music teacher, the first in his family to go to college. I had an older brother and sister, both of whom went to college, ended up going to medical school and law school. My parents just really thought highly of education and wanted us, like, the American dream, wanted us to do better than they did and wanted us to do better than their parents did. And so I went off to Ithaca College in the fall of 1991. And one of the things that I became enamored with when I was at Ithaca was I was on the student newspaper and reporting on the college itself as a student journalist, eventually became editor of that. But then between junior and senior year, I came to Washington, D.C., where I now live, and was an intern at U.S. News and World Report working on its college guide, the college rankings. So for the summer of 1994, I worked as an intern on the college guide and on the rankings. And that's really when my eyes were opened up to this idea that college is an industry. We tend to think of it as this emotional thing that we buy, but we clearly are buying a big product, a huge product in some ways, probably one of the most expensive things we're going to buy in our lives. And that people needed better information about that decision, about where they were going, why they were going, what they were getting out of it. And that's really when this started. Spending that summer at US News and then a couple of years later ending up at the Chronicle of Higher Education. So you're right. I mean, it's not something I grew up with, obviously a love of education and a family of educators, but it was something that clearly I understood very early on that we needed to provide better information to parents and students. And that's what I hope I'm doing now.
Awesome. Well, I'm super appreciative that you're doing this work because it's a lot for parents. And one of the things that I know is that this last year was, I think, the largest college applicant pool we've ever seen. It was like the largest graduating class of high school seniors we've ever had. What's driving that application boom? Is it just the common application or the idea that you can click a button and apply to a million schools now?
So two things happened this year in particular. One was the class of 2025 was the largest high school graduating class in the US for quite some time. We're actually now going to start to see a decline in the number of high school graduates. But what's interesting is that we've had booms and busts over the years of high school graduates, but it's not really a function of the number of high school graduates necessarily in terms of applications. In terms of enrollment, definitely, there's only so many students to enroll in college. The big difference now is that each individual student, instead of applying to 2 or 3 or 4 colleges, are applying on average to 7 or 8 or 9. And so we've seen this huge explosion, 4 times as many applications today as there were in 2001. And most of those are coming from, a small group of students who are applying to sometimes 12, 13, 14, 15 schools. The Common App definitely plays a role in that, even though they deny they do. But they definitely play a role in that. But second is that it almost feeds on itself. So when students start to hear that somebody didn't get into X college and they think, oh my God, that's a great student. How did they not get into UCLA or USC or Michigan? I now start to fret about that. I start to be anxious about that. And so what do? I apply to 5 more other colleges at the same time. And so that's what's really driving this, is that one year's results then lead to the next year to do even more. That next year leads to another year to do even more. And we end up to where we are today.
Yeah. Anxiety fueling a boom in applications, at least. What you mentioned earlier is that college is a business. You're buying a product. The college is obviously selling a product. Do the colleges themselves play a role in this boom? I mean, aside from, producing some of that anxiety by not letting some very highly qualified students in, is there other stuff that they're doing? Are they marketing? Are they like getting in front of students more?
Well, there's no doubt about it that the marketing machine has turned way up on college admissions. I looked at that in my last book, in Who Gets In and Why. The whole first chapter was a kind of a profile of Bill Royal, who did direct marketing for politicians back in the 60s and 70s, and then moved that into higher education starting in the 1980s. But then the other boom, and I trace this in the new book, in Dream School, is our access to information and how quickly it travels now. So since I interned at US News and World Report, one big difference is that the government just collects a lot more data on higher ed. It puts that data out there. So that's one big change that has happened since I interned at US News. But the second big change is there's this thing called the internet. There are things called Reddit, threads and Facebook groups and College Confidential and everything else that's out there. And so now you have people trading information on all the data that they have around higher education. So much different than 1994 when I interned at US News and World Report. We literally had to call colleges up to get much of this information. They had to fill out surveys for US News. And then, by the way, US News and a couple of other players they printed these guidebooks that you then would go buy in a bookstore because you didn't even have Amazon then. But you didn't have this thing called the internet where all this information was there and freely traded, people giving advice. So I think a lot of the frenzy, a lot of the anxiety is really coming about because of this information marketplace that we have developed.
Yeah. In my town, there has been this sort of surge. It's probably related to the application boom. There's been this surge in high-priced college admission counselors, people who are hiring these coaches and spending tens of thousands of dollars for them. I've heard tell of people spending 30 grand per kid, and they start working with your kids in like 8th grade before they're even in high school and even thinking about college. So most families don't have those resources or the privilege to invest in that. Maybe you talk about this in your book, what ordinary families can do to level the playing field for their kids if they can't spend $30,000 on a college coach.
The information marketplace that I was talking about earlier on the internet has also democratized college admissions in a way that didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago. On one hand, it has increased the frenzy around college admissions and maybe made it a little confusing or maybe a lot confusing. It also has given us information at our fingertips about colleges and universities where you could gain a lot of the knowledge that counselors might have, both high school counselors and college counselors. Obviously, they're the experts. They spend their entire day doing this. I get it. And so they're really good resources if you could afford them or if you have great counselors at your high school. But you can supplement that. You can add to that. Maybe not exactly replace it through Reddit threads, Facebook groups. It takes time. And I think, Adam, that's the biggest issue is that, you're a parent, you're working, you might have multiple kids, you have a lot going on. And it is an incredibly confusing marketplace that you need to spend time learning. And that requires deep reading. It requires spending time online, asking questions, participating in webinars, listening to podcasts, all that stuff. And I think that most parents just don't have that time. They want to press that easy button, which of course, unfortunately doesn't exist for this. And that is where I think then they turn, if they can afford it, independent counselors. That's where they hope they have a great high school counselor who can kind of fill in that gap.
Yeah. So they're sort of supplanting that time with money or using that to buy them the time or the shortcut.
In many ways, it's no different than somebody hiring somebody to clean their house, cut their grass, things like that. That's essentially what they're doing. And I'm not, by the way, I'll probably hear from a lot of independent counselors who are listening to this podcast. I'm not comparing them to somebody who cleans your house or cuts your grass. I'm just saying that they hire experts or somebody else to do the work when they either don't have the time or don't have the expertise.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. And hopefully those folks listening to this don't flock to Twitter or social media to harangue you for that. I know that's not the comparison you're making. But there is a comparison that you have made, which I'm a big sports fan. One of my favorite books and movies is Moneyball, which is all about how you apply data to find undervalued baseball players. And this is a thing that's like exploded in sports, right? Everybody's got quantitative people on staff now trying to find underutilized, undervalued players with skills. And you have suggested that families can take this approach in their school search. So can you explain that a little bit more to me? How do people take the Moneyball approach to figuring out their school choice?
So I think one of the things, and I talk about this in the new book, is looking at value versus prestige versus money. What's interesting to me is that for families who could afford it, college has always been kind of this prestige game that they played. just like Moneyball, you went for the most famous top pick, right? Or you went for the most famous free agent out there and you just signed them, right? I'm a big fan of the New York Yankees. This was like exactly what the Yankees did during the 1980s, right? Whoever the biggest free agent out there, they just signed them. But did they fit in with the team? What are their, deeper stats now that we know about baseball players, in fact? The difference now is that even for families who can afford it, how do you balance prestige versus value and money? And what do I mean by value and money? I think there are two things that families should be looking at. One is ROI. So how much am I going to spend on this degree and what am I going to get out of it? And there's a great tool called the College Scorecard, which looks at how much money you're going to make with that degree from that institution. You could compare institutions by major and start to really understand, okay, they're expecting me to pay full price here. This other institution is giving me financial aid. And by the way, at the end of the day, I'm going to make perhaps the same amount of money no matter where I get that degree. So that's one way to assess value. The second way is through merit aid. In the last book, I talked about the buyers and sellers. The buyers are the vast majority of institutions that have to give out financial aid in order to attract students. Now, when I tell parents this, they're like, well, what do you mean financial aid? I don't know if I'm going to qualify for aid. And I'm like, it has nothing to do with need-based aid. That's a whole separate pot of money. There's a pot of money at most colleges and universities called merit aid. It's essentially a discount. It's essentially a coupon to get you in the door. And this kind of blows parents away who are really not kind of in college day to day. And the value there that you're looking for is how far up the pecking order of higher ed can I go and still get the money I need? And so it's a balancing act between those two things. And that to me is how you moneyball this process is how can I get the best degree with the best ROI at the same time? How can I get that prestige, but also get some money? And so tuition's not as much as it is in most places.
I think about this in the lens of business, KPIs, performance indicators, metrics. You talked about this from an ROI perspective. Are there any other key metrics that parents and students should look at to identify colleges that are really great opportunities but are often overlooked?
So I definitely think you'd want to look at those outcome measures. You want to look at graduation rates and retention rates. Now, at the very top colleges, they're going to have fantastic graduation rates and fantastic retention rates. But what you often miss are those metrics at less selective colleges. So you definitely want to look at that. I'm more interested in the professors. Who are the professors? Not necessarily how many full-time professors that they are, but what's the ratio between undergraduate and graduate? If you're looking for a baccalaureate degree, a bachelor's degree, how much of this institution is really focused on the undergraduate experience? That's what I really want to know. So you're going to be looking at class size. You're going to be looking at faculty size. When you get to go to that campus, you're going to find out, are those professors who show up in their office hours when they say they're going to be? I like to go to classes when I'm on campus because I want to see what is that professor doing before and after class? Do they come early? Do they spend time with students? Do they spend time afterwards with students as they're leaving class? Those are less moneyballish, but they are definitely metrics that you should be looking at and studying when you have a chance to go to campus.
And in some of those cases, those are even, not quantitative, they're more qualitative. They're more like observations that you can make in studying the school, which I think is really interesting. A couple more questions on the application process, and then I want to go really deep into Dream School. A lot of seniors that I've talked to, babysitters, things like that, are talking about applying early decision or early action. And that was something that I thought about when I was going to college, but it didn't seem like that prevalent. It was kind of pretty rare. And so I wanted to ask about early decision, early action. What is that? And is it worth it for a family to be doing that if it means early commitment to something?
So early action, early decision, definitely much bigger now than it was in 20 or 30 years ago. In fact, I trace in who gets in and why early decision, particularly after the 2008 recession, exploded. And what happened then was that recession hits in the fall of 2008, most colleges and universities in the beginning of their application process, and they were worried that they wouldn't be able to fill their class. The thing about early decision is you apply early. You apply usually by November 1st. You find out early, usually in December of your senior year. But then if you get in, you're committed to going. So it's essentially 100% yield rate, meaning the number of students who enroll who are accepted. And now everybody essentially enrolls who's going to be accepted early decision. And what was interesting in 2008 is that colleges might have taken 25% of their class this way. They ended up taking like half their class that year this way, meaning half their class was set by December. And what happened the years after that, they didn't go back to 25%. They just kept leaning into early decision year after year. And so it just became a much bigger thing. Early action is similar, but it's not binding. Now you might say, well, then why does it matter? Because colleges, just like a business, wants students in their funnel as long as they can. By applying early, it gets students kind of in their system. They could communicate with them often. Students know then they're in, hopefully, into that college. Colleges can then really try to yield to them, meaning convert them in business speak. That's what early action does. And both of these have become much bigger particularly in the last decade. Now, should you do them? Early action, in many cases, is a no-brainer. If you're interested in a college, it's nice to get that application out. The thing that you need to remember, though, is that in early action, you might get an acceptance, you might get a rejection. You might also get something called a deferral, meaning they're going to defer you to regular decision. As a result, you might not get the answer you want. Early decision is something completely different. I'm not a huge fan of it, but if you really know where you want to go, you want the search to be over and money is not as big of an issue, because remember, if you get an early decision, you're going. You don't have a chance to compare financial aid offers from multiple campuses. If that's kind of describes you, then go for it. But there's no reason that you have to go for it. A lot of students do because they feel like, well, this is my only shot to get into, fill in the blank college.
And you just mentioned this sort of nebulous deferral to like the regular decision time. I heard a lot of seniors this year who got that, right? Because there's a huge wave of early decision, early action, huge wave of deferrals, like those kind of move in lockstep. What do you advise students to do if they're deferred during early action?
Well, you want to try to get a sense for how many students were deferred. Some students get deferred because something's missing from their application or they want to see grades later on. But if most of the applicant pool was deferred, 80, 90%, your chances of getting in are going to be slimmer, that's for sure, in regular decision. So if it's a place you want to go, continue to push forward and continue to tell them that you're interested, send them notes, go to activities that they're having, follow them on social media, show interest that you want to go. That's definite. But also have a plan B, have a backup plan. The early decision deferral may turn into an acceptance. It may not. And you just want to be ready if it doesn't, so that you have another alternative kind of sitting out there.
My last question before we get really deep into Dream School is, like a lot of things, and I talk to a lot of parents on this podcast about a whole bunch of different topics. It seems that parents have really inserted themselves into the process of college selection and decision making. I think when I was applying for college, the insertion was basically, are you interested in my alma mater? From my parents, and how much is this going to cost? Those were like the two things. Now you've got parents like almost grooming their kids with extracurriculars and they're trying to make a more well-rounded student early on. But aside from all of that, what do you see and what do you tell parents about what their role should be in the application and decision-making process?
So parents are there as a guide, but I remind parents this is not their college search. They definitely have to set up guide rails. They have to nudge a little bit. The guide rails are important, obviously, for finances. They have to nudge to make sure students are making their deadline. They have to be there to discuss and question to get a sense of what their child is thinking and perhaps give them advice. But there's a fine line between advice and telling them what to do. And I think that's the part that parents sometimes miss or oftentimes miss, where they feel like, well, I didn't spend all this time, money, and effort on raising you for you to go to this college that my friends won't be impressed with when I tell them where you're going to college. And that is the main reason I wrote Dream School, is to try to give parents permission to think more broadly about what makes for a good college. Because if we don't do that, we are going to be kind of stuck in this doom loop of parents feeling like they failed because their kids are not going to Stanford or Yale or whatever.
All right, well, let's talk more about Dream School. Tell me about the research process for Dream School. This was a quite impressive undertaking.
Thank you. So, unlike Who Gets In and Why, which I was mostly centered in college and university admissions offices, the three that I profiled in Who Gets In and Why, this was mostly spending time with parents, students, families, high school counselors, independent counselors, to try to understand not only what has changed about the college admissions process since the pandemic, which a lot has, but also to understand kind of how they're choosing schools and why. Because then I wanted to take that process of how they choose schools to really understand, is that the right way to choose schools? Are they looking at the right factors? Are they looking at how this college starts them off? I'm a very big fan of first year experiences. Are they looking at how this college helps them find their sense of belonging so that they find their people when they get to college? Is this college helping them, give them the skill sets that they need to succeed in the marketplace? And then, and this is increasingly true in the last couple of years as we've seen some colleges go out of business, is this a college that has the financial wherewithal to support them as students? So not less interested, will this college go out of business? Some will. I'm not really worried about the vast majority of colleges, but some will. I'm more worried that the colleges are going to kind of underinvest in things that are absolutely critical for students to succeed.
Yeah. Is there anything in this process of surveying all these parents and families that was surprising or changed your previous perspective on things?
Let me mention three things. One, just kind of confirmed what I already knew. College is about the job. It's about getting the job. We've known this from a big survey that UCLA does of college freshmen going all the way back to 2008. The number one reason to go to college is a job. Same thing the parents told us. It's all about the job. But two other things surprised me in the survey. We did a survey of more than 3,000 parents for this book. One was about prestige. So I asked parents, is prestige important to you? 16% said yes. And then 27% said it was important to their kids. 16% important to them. 27% said it was important to their kids. 61%, though, said it was important to other people in their community. And this is where I think in our most vulnerable, honest moments that I heard from parents, I don't really care about prestige. My kid doesn't care about prestige. But there's so much pressure in this community to go to certain places. And what will their friends think? What will my friends think, right? Like all that is really caught up in this idea of what means success in America. And this is, again, why I really want to create this permission structure to say, let go of that. It's okay. And then the other final thing that surprised me was about value and willingness to pay. So even among parents in my survey who could afford to pay full price, increasingly questioning whether that's worth it. And what we're starting to see, as I point out in the book, we're starting to see them skip over a whole group of colleges that 10, 15 years ago, they would have paid full price for. And now saying, not worth it. I'll pay full price for Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, you name the top 15 schools. But after that, I'm going to look for money. And even if that means skipping over number 20 in the rankings, number 25 in the rankings, I'm okay with that. I'm going to save some money.
College about the job, prestige.
Yep.
Not for me, but it is for other people, which is a common thing in a lot of different surveys. Not about prestige, but about a lot of different factors. And then this value and willingness to pay. These are really interesting shifts. Based on this and your conversations, do you think these are the right things for parents to be worried about? Would you advise them to think differently, or what's your opinion on this?
I don't think we necessarily need to think about prestige as much as we do and worry about it, because we see from other results in the book that people are getting hired at all different kinds of companies no matter where they went to college. So college matters. As I say in the book, if everybody gets a lottery ticket walking out of college, you get a second lottery ticket for going to a more prestigious college. Your chances are not twice as much, but they're definitely a little bit better if you go to prestigious college. So we should worry a little bit about prestige, but I think we spend too much time on it. The job is an interesting one to me, Adam, because I feel like we have put so much focus on the job and the payment that comes after college because college has become so expensive that it then results in students deciding on a major from high school that they're not really sure of, but it must pay. I'm going to go into finance because it pays a lot of money. I'm going to major in engineering. I'm okay at it. I don't love it, but it pays a lot of money. And then they get there. They may not even like it, but they kind of grind it out. And then they get into a career that they don't love as a result. What I hope in all of this is that we would have more exploration. And that is the part where if college is all about the job, I get it. I understand why. I feel like it diminishes the parts of college that help students develop into full, blown human beings, help them discover new ideas, help them discover new careers. And that part I think is missing when we focus on the job.
Yeah, for me, college, I resonate a lot with what you just said. I tried to be an engineer in college and I lasted one semester and I had a bit of an existential crisis and decided I hated it. I did something else. Thankfully, I went to a school that had diversity of option and I didn't go to like Harvey Mudd or MIT or something where that was my only option. I think that's really fascinating. And then the other thing is, independence. I think best thing that college taught me, in addition to academic stuff, was how to live and survive and thrive on my own. And so that's an overlooked aspect of going to college too, I think. I wanted to talk about your definition of a dream school. So we talked about fit. Obviously that's important. How do you define dream school? And then how can families, what are some other ways that families can figure out if that college offers that type of dream school environment?
So I think this is really important because when people see the title, they think, oh my God, you're kind of playing into this, mentality around that there's a single school for, our perfect dream school that you want to go to. Dream to me is a slightly different in this case. There's not a single school. There's not even a single category of schools. It doesn't mean it's like the Ivy League or the SEC. I want to go to a Big Ten school. That's my dream. It's more about your fit, finding your right fit. Where are places where you're going to learn for how you like to learn, where you're going to thrive, where you're going to find your people. Like that to me is how you define a dream school. It's less about prestige. It's less about where everyone else is going. And it's more about finding that right fit for what you need and being comfortable with that. Because that's the piece where I think people kind of get enamored with brand names because they think I have to go to one of those in order to succeed. And I have a ton of examples throughout the book and data throughout the book that shows that's not the case.
What are some more of those underappreciated factors that really determine fit? And maybe families overlook some of these things. You mentioned a few earlier around presence of professor and, are they there early? Do they stay late? And, how often do you see them and things like that? But are there other things?
Mentorship in general is critically important. Professors are an important piece of that process because those are the people you're going to spend most of your time with, especially early on. A school that provides scaffolding early on. So I'm a very big fan of the freshman year experience where they are putting you in smaller cohorts. They have additional advisors spending time with you is critically important. Third is around skills. What skills are you going to learn and how are you going to learn them? It's not just about the course catalog and the curriculum that you're going to follow for your major, but are you learning specific skills, whether it's project management, maybe you're learning, Salesforce, something that you can actually take with you and showcase to a potential employer that you've learned this specific skill, data visualization, just, throwing out a bunch of other data analytics, whatever it might be. Fourth is around the internship and experiential learning. It doesn't necessarily have to be an internship, but you have a chance to apply your learning in real time. So that could be internships, undergraduate research, project-based learning that's happening, and the college is helping you get that is absolutely critical. And then finally, it's really around finding the sense of belonging. And how do colleges help you, not only the admissions process, but through that first year experience in finding those people that are, right for you, that are your people, that can help push you, advise you, and do all those things, and many of them will become your, friends for life.
Something that I'm concerned about as a parent is this sort of growing trend in the rise of neurodiversity, especially ADHD in kids. I have a son who has that diagnosis. And so I'm wondering if you address this at all, or if you come across, parents of neurodiverse kids, how you talk to them about thinking about college admissions and finding fit. Is that different than, how you might talk to a neurotypical family?
It is different. The book doesn't really get into this. There's a lot of expertise out there. I always point people in that direction, and there's a lot of books in this area as well. This is where, again, I think also independent consultants that we were talking about earlier could be helpful on that front as well. I do think, though, that colleges are starting to understand that there's not one segment of student that they need to serve. And this is where, again, looking at colleges kind of off the beaten path, deeper in the rankings, if you want to go to a highly selective college, they have a ton of applications. They don't really care that much about the student. They care about just kind of maintaining their presence in the rankings where they are. They're going to serve the traditional 18-year-old student who comes largely more from middle and upper middle class families. They'll put a little bit of effort into low-income students, who are on Pell Grants. But for the most part, they're going to serve the student that they've always served, that their faculty likes to teach. If you have a neurodiverse student, this is where I'm talking to parents about, is like, you do want to look for schools where they are going to have the resources and give you the resources, give you access to the resources to help you. And again, I just don't see, and I know that these highly selective colleges that we're so enamored with care as much. In many ways, they don't care about your success at the end of the day. It's kind of sink or swim mentality, where a lot of other colleges really care about you as a student.
Yeah. So we talked about, on the same topic, the role of prestige and how brand name probably matters a little bit less than people think. It's not the end all be all. I'm curious if you can provide a couple of examples from Dream School of maybe some lesser known schools that aren't that Ivy level name or that household name that end up being also great schools, and kind of what makes them special.
I'm just going to throw out a couple of options here. And we are not playing any favorites. So, because I'm literally going to talk about these off the top of my head. Let's say Dickinson College in Pennsylvania. A really good price to earnings ratio, which is one of the things we looked at the book. In other words, how much money are you spending to get the degree that you have? Largely because of their location. They're not that far from the nation's capital. They're not that far from the state capital. Students have a lot of access to good internships and jobs as a result. St. Olaf College in Minnesota really focused on that first year programming, creating this first year experience. I see this through a couple of the dream schools, Denison University in Ohio, Furman University in South Carolina also do that. Michigan State, right? We often think of the University of Michigan when we think Michigan State, creating neighborhoods as we think about creating smaller groupings of students within a larger university. Many do this through honors colleges as well. Arizona State University has the Barrett Honors College, where they're making the big school feel small as a result. So those are just some of the examples that I talk about in the book about these new dream schools. All of them, by the way, have acceptance rates of at least 25, 30%. Most of them have acceptance rates 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Very important for this list that we want them to be accessible. And we then brought a lot of data to the table to really look at how well they're serving students as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And even in that list that you just rattled off there, like, I think I only know a couple of those colleges. It pains me to hear Michigan State as a University of Michigan graduate.
Which is why I picked that.
But I appreciate you twisting the knife a little bit there. But no, you're right. I mean, it does sound like they are even doing some things that I wasn't aware of and trying to create more like community small community aspects to make that experience better for students. It's
And
great.
listen, the University of Michigan is a fantastic school. Just like in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, great school. But in North Carolina, I talk a lot about North Carolina State. Again, you're looking at these places that are accessible. The big problem with Michigan is it's hard to get into, whether you're in state or out of state. And you need places where they're not defined by how many students they're rejecting, but how many students they're accepting.
Yeah. So if a parent of a younger child asks you, let's say they're my kid's age, 7th grade, 5th grade, they've heard, maybe the other competitive parents are starting to talk about college admissions for a 13-year-old or something. What's the single biggest piece of advice from Dream School that a parent like me should remember when my kids are that college bound age? Like, what would you tell, me now that could help me in a few more years?
Pay attention to what you like, how you like to learn, the why. And there's an opening anecdote in the book around a student who ends up at Columbia, won the lottery, as he said, to get into Columbia. And then he gets there and all these like little things that add up pretty quickly that he never noticed during the college search. He can't get into the class he wants. He can't do research with a professor that he wanted to. There's like essentially lines to get into a club, meaning a student club, because so many students want to get into certain clubs. The core curriculum is not what he thought it was, or it really didn't even pay much attention to it. And I think that's the thing. We get so focused on the name, on the institution, that sticker we're going to put on the back of our car. Even when we go to campus, we're not really looking under the hood very much. We're taking a quick tour around campus. Oh, they have good food in the dining hall and the students seem happy and it's sunny here. And oh, look at the game on Saturday. It's so much fun. And Greek life is so much fun. And then we get there, and this is the biggest takeaway from Dream School for me, is we get there and we're like, oh, it's like touring a house on an open house and skipping like the kitchen and the bathroom, just like skipping some rooms that are really critical to how you're going to live in that house every day, or like going to buy a car and never getting into it and actually driving it.
Yeah.
And that to me is the essence of what you should be doing earlier in high school. I have kids who are rising 10th grader now, and or a 10th grader and a 8th grader. We just talk about what they like to do. What are their favorite classes? What are their teachers? What are their teachers like? What do they like about their teachers? Do they like when their teachers lecture at them? Do they like small group projects? All those things, because all of that one day will add up to what are you looking for in a college.
That's great. All right, I want to talk a little bit in closing about future outlook here. So college has changed a lot over the last few decades. I expect it will change more. A few colleges, like my other arch rival, Ohio State, have recently announced that they're starting to really more deeply integrate AI into their curriculum. I don't quite know what that means yet, but we'll find out. Do you think that this type of change and this sort of rise of AI technology, does this change the consideration process for finding your dream school? Or should it change the consideration process, or should we wait and see?
If I knew the answer to that question, I don't know what I'd be. I'd probably be the richest man in America right now. You're right to ask that question. And I think parents are right to be worried. And I see this every day. Maybe my kid should not be a computer science major now because there's going to be no computer science jobs in 4 years. I will argue that we've always known that jobs change. Maybe they are changing faster today than they ever have before. I'll give you that. Let me tell you a little bit of a personal story here in that I went to Ithaca College in 1991. It was the time when communications, it was all analog. And people went there because they wanted to work in newspapers. They wanted to work at radio stations, and they wanted to work in TV, network TV. Today, if we think about those industries now, there's really no such thing as network TV anymore. It's all streaming. We don't turn on the radio. It's all streaming now, and the whole music industry has changed. Newspapers don't exist the way they do because we carry these things in our pocket that tell us the news, or we're getting it on Facebook and things like that. In other words, all those industries were incredibly disrupted I would argue within the first 20 years of me graduating. Now, I understand that's 20 years to pivot. And parents are saying, but this is all going to change in 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. We've always had to pivot. And the reason we're able to pivot is because we're educated. We're able to problem solve. We're able to communicate. We're able to work in teams. We're creative. I'm using those words deliberately right now because that to me is what you're looking for in a college education.
Yeah.
How do I get those creative juices flowing? How do I learn to work with teams? How do I problem solve? How do I communicate, which I think is going to become even more important in an age when AI is going to write so much more. That to me is if you focus on those things, you're going to be able to complement technology and not have to always compete with it going forward. More than that, it's hard to give specific advice because I don't think any of us really know. I don't think we should not go to college as a result. I don't think we should be so hung up on what major we want to pick, but whatever major we pick, just make sure that we are broadly educated. Because at the end of the day, when I think about what I take away most from my Ithaca College education, it was not around a specific course that taught me radio the way it did, but it was the philosophy courses, the macroeconomics courses, the internships I had, the jobs I had on campus. All of that contributed to my education to make me who I am today.
Last couple future outlook questions for you. You talk in the book about value picking and trying to find good ROI. But I think more broadly, the cost of college has really grown so fast. And this is a big topic, right? It just seems unsustainable, untenable for a lot of parents, right? Certainly wages aren't increasing at the rate of college expense. Do you foresee that something has to shift here over time? When you talk to colleges, like, what are you hearing there? You just kind of mentioned this, but how do you talk to parents when they ask that question, like, is college still worth it?
So I definitely say college is still worth it. But what's interesting, I just posted recently online, this is like the US News. I have these US News rankings from like 1989 and 1990.
Yes.
Look how yellow they are.
Yeah.
But in one of them, there's this poll of college presidents around how to reduce prices. We were talking about this when I went to college.
Wow.
And what has happened? Prices just continue to go up. This is a perennial problem. I do feel like we have reached a breaking point when the majority of the public is not only stressed about this, they literally just can't afford it. And I think there's been a number of changes in Washington over the last couple of months in terms of loans and funding for higher education. I think that's really going to squeeze colleges in a way that they're going to have to figure out how to do business differently. At the end of the day, Adam, people always ask me, why does college cost so much? It's because it can. There's been a market for it. And either people paid for it out of pocket and went deep into debt to do it, but they did it because they thought it was important. And I still think it's important, but we shouldn't be putting people into, especially young adults, into deep debt so they could have this dream that they need to have in order to succeed in life. And so I do think, maybe I'm Pollyannish here, maybe I'm overly optimistic. I do think the time has come where colleges, to stay in business, will have to focus on cutting their costs in order to either, I don't necessarily think cut the price, but at least like level it off for students and parents.
Slow that growth or flatline it. A little bit of a supply demand question for you. We talked about this at the very beginning of the recording here, that we're crossing over this enrollment cliff, right? We had this huge graduating senior class, a huge spike in applications, obviously because the average application per student volume is going way up. But now you mentioned that enrollment or graduation rates from high school, or graduation numbers from high school, are going to start coming down. And we see this in K through 12 education across the country. There are fewer students in school. Like, it's just numbers are down. That's a population thing. How do you think this is going to impact college admissions in the overall landscape?
At the very top, I don't think it's going to change that much. Those schools are already inundated with applications. They could actually take a haircut on applications and be fine. Further down the pecking order, though, I think it's going to be an incredibly competitive marketplace to get students. I think that means there's going to be bigger discounts. But there's also going to be more differentiation between colleges and universities because they're going to have to differentiate in ways like, oh, we're going to be the place that gives you co-ops or internships. Oh, we're going to be the place that really focuses on the last 2 years, and we're going to partner with this community college, or we're going to increasingly take more students who want to transfer to here after getting a community college degree. We're going to be the place that focuses on that first year experience and not forcing you to pick a major that first year. We're going to be a place that is interested in mastery-based learning, meaning you're going to have more personalized learning. So if you learn something more quickly than somebody else, you could move on faster. Or if you move slower, you could really focus on those things. There's all these different ways, just like me and you could watch TV very different today than we did 30 years ago, right? We don't have to turn on TV at 8 o'clock at night to watch the same program. The same thing is going to happen in colleges. Not everybody has to start in September, end in May. Not everybody has to go for 4 years. Not everybody has to go to class, X number of times a week to get Y number of credits. That, to me, that differentiation is going to be forced on colleges because they're going to have to finally contend with their costs.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great place to wrap up our conversation. We'll do a little bit of lightning round, just a couple fun questions. Before that, though, I wanted to ask, in addition to buying a copy of Dream School, how can people follow along or be helpful to you?
The best way is follow me on most of the social media channels. I'm at J Selingo is my handle. If you go to jeffselingo.com, that's my website. You could get everything you want to get there. You could subscribe to my newsletter, which is called Next. It comes out about every other week. I also co-host my own podcast called Future You, mostly meant for people in the business, but it's interesting. A lot of parents and students and others who are interested in higher ed listen to it because we're basically pretty accessible, I think, in terms of talking about higher ed. So that's the best way to reach me.
Okay. Well, we will link to all of those places. Can't wait to help you sell some copies of your book, too.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right. Well, we have a few minutes for lightning round. Lightning round is going to be a little different than our conversation about Dream School. It's a little bit more about you and some of your thoughts on things. And we try to keep it lighthearted. So I only have about 6 or 7 questions, maybe.
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. No one is ever truly ready for lightning round, just so you know. What would you say is the most indispensable parenting product that you've ever purchased?
I would go with, I guess, the car seat, right? Like you can't really go anywhere without the car seat.
True.
So let's go with the car seat.
Can't even leave the hospital without it.
Yes, exactly.
What is the most useless parenting product you've ever purchased?
Oh, geez, it's like 90% of what's out there. Like anything that's in I will be honest with you, I am like a marketer's dream. My wife won't let me go to the supermarket because I always come back with twice as many things because whatever's on the end cap, I buy. So what's ever in my Instagram feed, I buy. Right. So I have wasted money on a lot of indispensable products.
Okay, you'll probably get a lot more Instagram advertising after this episode too. True or false? There's only one correct way to load the dishwasher.
Oh, that's definitely true. Yes,
Okay,
I reload the dishwasher when my kids load it, or sometimes even when my wife loads it.
Like a true dad. What is your signature dad superpower?
Connecting parents and their kids with each other. Like I like to talk to kids like they're adults because adults in my life growing up treated me like an adult and they didn't talk down to me. And I love including, families in conversations.
Okay. If your kids had to describe you in one word, what would it be?
Forgetful.
Oh, aren't we all? What is your favorite kids movie?
Toy Story.
Okay.
The original, the first one.
The number one.
Yeah, number one. I know people love number 3 or whatever, but number 1 still the best one.
Now, do you have a nostalgic movie that you just couldn't wait to force your kids to watch with you?
Oh, yes, The Karate Kid, and they hated it. They hated it.
Okay. How often do you tell your kids back in my day stories?
Every day.
Okay, good. Good. You're doing the job. And finally, I love to end with this question. What is your take on minivans?
Never had one, never will have one.
Okay. All right. Clear and to the point. Okay. Well, Jeff, excited for your new book, Dream School, Finding the College That's Right for You. Thank you so much for joining me today and educating me on the college decision-making process. And I wish you and your kids and your family all the best for the rest of the year.
It's been great to be with you. Thank you so much for your support of this book and for your podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Jeff Selingo. You can subscribe and watch the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit www.startupdadpod.com to learn more and browse past episodes. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.